My name is Louisa Gaines, and I was 31 years old the night my mother called me trash at Christmas dinner. Not as a joke, not as a badly timed attempt at humor. She looked straight at me in front of 18 relatives and said I was the family disappointment who had just gotten lucky. She expected me to laugh. I didn't laugh, I didn't argue, I didn't cry. I stood up, packed my bags in silence, and left. But to understand why that moment shattered something in me for good, you need to understand the life that led up to it. I grew up in Ohio as the older daughter in a family that never quite knew what to do with me. My younger sister, Lauren, was born 3 years after me, and from the second she entered the world, the atmosphere in our house changed. She wasn't just the baby, she was the center. Lauren cried, and the house stopped. Lauren struggled, and resources appeared. Lauren failed, and it became everyone else's responsibility to cushion the fall. Me, I was expected to adjust. I learned early that praise was conditional for me and automatic for her. If I succeeded, it was expected. If she succeeded, it was celebrated. If she failed, it was excused. If I failed, it was dissected. By 16, I was working part-time at a grocery store to save for a used car. 18 months of evening shifts, sore feet, and counting tips. My parents said it would build character. When Lauren turned 16, they bought her a brand new Mustang. Cash. When I asked why, my mother smiled and said Lauren is different. She needs more support. That sentence followed me for the next 15 years. I graduated high school with honors while juggling work. Lauren barely scraped by after private tutors my parents paid for. Guess who got the catered graduation party? I put myself through college on scholarships and work study. Lauren dropped out after 3 semesters, and my parents paid off her student loans anyway. When I asked for help, my mother laughed and told me I was capable. Lauren apparently was fragile. After college, I moved to Arizona for work. I built my career from the ground up, long hours, missed holidays, constant pressure. Lauren drifted from job to job, subsidized monthly by my parents. Then quietly something shifted. By 29, I was managing high-value portfolios. By 31, I was making more than my parents combined. And suddenly my success made them uncomfortable. My mother started asking if my lifestyle was necessary. She warned me not to get arrogant. She praised Lauren's simple life while ignoring the fact that simplicity was funded by their retirement. I still came home every holiday. Which brings us to that Christmas. 18 people. A perfect table. Lauren seated dead center between my parents like royalty. Her new girlfriend beside her, smiling unaware. I answered my grandmother's question about work politely. I didn't brag. I didn't boast. That's when my mother laughed and said, "It's funny how the family trash pretends to be successful." The table went silent. Lauren smirked. My father stared at his plate. Something inside me went cold. So I stood up, I packed my bag, and I walked out without a word. Because some things don't need explanations. They need action. I didn't sleep on the flight back to Arizona. I stared out the window, watching clouds drift beneath the wing, replaying moments from my childhood that suddenly felt less like memories and more like evidence. A pattern so obvious, it almost embarrassed me that it took 31 years to finally accept it for what it was. Lauren had always been the exception. I had always been the expectation. When I was 8, I broke my arm falling off my bike. I remember sitting in the emergency room with my arm in a sling while my mother scolded me for riding too fast. She said accidents happened when you weren't careful enough. 2 weeks later, Lauren sprained her ankle during soccer practice. My parents canceled work, ordered her favorite takeout, and turned our living room into a recovery nest. She got sympathy. I got a lecture. At 12, I forgot my lunch money one day. My mother told me it was my responsibility to remember things if I wanted to be taken seriously. At 12, Lauren forgot her science project at home. My dad left work early to bring it to her because he didn't want her to feel stressed. Those moments stacked quietly year after year, small on their own, crushing together. By high school, the rules were clear even if no one ever said them out loud. I was the reliable one, the self-sufficient one, the daughter who didn't need help. Lauren was the sensitive one, the complicated one, the one who needed protecting from consequences. I didn't resent Lauren at first. That came later. At the beginning, I just tried harder. Better grades, more responsibility, less complaining. I thought if I proved I didn't need anything, maybe they'd notice me anyway. They didn't. When I worked weekends to save for my car, my parents told me it was good for me. When Lauren complained about being bored, they handed her money and told her to go have fun with friends. When I stayed up late studying, it was discipline. When Lauren skipped class, it was burnout. And every time I tried to point out the imbalance, my mother shut it down with the same sentence. Lauren is different. Different became the excuse for everything. Different meant she got grace. Different meant she got forgiveness. Different meant she got saved. I went to college with a backpack full of scholarships and anxiety. Lauren went with a credit card my parents paid off when she quit. When she dropped out, my parents said college wasn't for everyone. When I graduated, they skipped my ceremony because Lauren had a cold. That one hurt more than I ever admitted. I remember standing in my cap and gown, scanning the crowd, telling myself it didn't matter, that I was proud of myself, that I didn't need them there. But something hollow settled into my chest that day, something that never quite went away. After college, I moved west and built a life piece by piece. I told myself distance would fix things, that if I became successful enough, stable enough, impressive enough, it would finally level the field. It didn't. Success didn't earn me respect. It earned me suspicion. Every promotion came with warnings. Every accomplishment was minimized. My mother worried I was becoming too focused on money. My father hinted that ambition wasn't everything. Meanwhile, they paid Lauren's rent, bought her groceries, replaced her car, and praised her for finding herself. By the time I hit 30, I had stopped expecting fairness. I just wanted civility. That Christmas, when my mother called me trash, it wasn't shocking because it was cruel. It was shocking because it was honest. For the first time, she said out loud what her actions had always implied. I wasn't the pride of the family. I wasn't the success story. I was the inconvenience who dared to outgrow her role. As the plane touched down in Arizona, I realized something else too. Something quietly terrifying and liberating. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. And when you finally stop hoping people will change you, start seeing them clearly for the first time. The strange thing about distance is that it doesn't always make relationships easier. Sometimes it just makes the imbalance clearer. After I moved to Arizona, my life settled into a rhythm that had nothing to do with my family. Long days at the office, early mornings at the gym, quiet nights in my apartment where no one expected anything from me except myself. For the first time, my worth wasn't being measured against Lauren's needs. I started at my firm in an entry-level analyst role. No shortcuts, no favors, just spreadsheets, late nights, and the constant pressure to prove I deserved the seat I was in. I learned quickly that competence was currency in that world. Results mattered more than excuses, and for the first time in my life, that played to my advantage. I worked harder than anyone else on my team, not because I wanted to show off, but because struggle was familiar territory. While others complained about deadlines, I stayed quiet and delivered. Promotions came slowly at first, then faster. Titles changed. Responsibilities expanded. By my late 20s, I was managing accounts I never would have imagined touching in my early 20s. When I told my parents about my first major promotion, my mother smiled tightly and asked if I was sure the role was stable. She said finance was risky. She said companies cut people loose all the time. She suggested I keep my options open, maybe move back home someday, just in case. The same week, they wired Lauren money for a deposit on a new apartment she couldn't afford on her own. Every visit home followed the same pattern. Polite hugs, surface-level questions, then subtle digs disguised as concern. Did I really need such a nice place? Was I working too much? Did I ever worry about burning out? Lauren, meanwhile, was praised for slowing down, for choosing balance, for not chasing money the way I did. Balance apparently meant part-time work funded by my parents' full-time savings. I noticed how the tone shifted whenever extended family was around. My mother downplayed my job, describing it vaguely while embellishing Lauren's plans. My father bragged about Lauren's potential. I was the footnote. And Lauren noticed too. She never said anything directly. She didn't have to. It was in the way she went quiet when I talked about work, in the eye rolls, in the comments about people who got lucky, in the way she framed my success as accidental, unearned. By the time I turned 31, I had worked my way into a senior leadership role. I was managing teams, closing deals, handling portfolios worth more than my parents' house ever had been. I was proud, even if I rarely said it out loud. That year, my firm closed its largest acquisition ever. I led the project. Months of planning, negotiations that kept me up at night. When it finally closed, my bonus alone eclipsed my father's annual salary. I didn't tell my family. Not because I was hiding anything, but because I knew better than to expect celebration. Success didn't bring me closer to them. It made me foreign. Still, I flew home for Christmas with something dangerously close to hope. A small, stupid part of me believed that maybe this time would be different. That maybe they'd finally see me not as competition, not as a threat, but as their daughter. Instead, they saw a problem that needed correcting. Lauren sat at the center of the table, glowing in attention, spinning stories about a new opportunity that made no sense if you asked the wrong questions. My parents nodded along like she was unveiling a masterpiece. When my mother finally said what she'd been thinking for years, it wasn't just cruelty. It was fear. Fear that I had outgrown the role they built for me. Fear that the narrative they'd invested in was cracking. Fear that the daughter they ignored had become the one who didn't need them anymore. And nothing terrifies people like losing control over the story they've told themselves. The first week after Christmas felt unreal, like I had stepped out of someone else's life and into my own for the first time. My apartment in Arizona was exactly as I had left it, quiet, clean, untouched by judgment. No passive-aggressive comments, no comparisons, no tension humming under every interaction. My phone, on the other hand, was relentless. At first, it was anger. My mother accused me of ruining Christmas. My father told me I was dramatic and immature. Lauren sent one message, short, sharp, and dripping with superiority, calling my exit a tantrum. I read every word. Then I turned my phone off. That silence wasn't punishment, it was protection. I went back to work and found myself focusing in a way I hadn't in years. Without the emotional drain of my family constantly pulling at me, I had energy left over. I started going to the gym regularly instead of collapsing onto my couch at night. I cooked real meals. I slept through the night without waking up with that familiar knot in my chest. Weeks passed. My mother's messages shifted tone. Anger softened into guilt. Guilt softened into concern. Concern turned into vague check-ins that carried the unspoken expectation that I would apologize first. I didn't respond. Not because I was trying to teach anyone a lesson, but because I genuinely had nothing to say. What conversation was there to have? She hadn't apologized. My father hadn't intervened. Lauren hadn't reached out at all. In the space they left behind, my life expanded. I started reconnecting with friends I had neglected over the years, people who didn't see me as a role or a resource, but as a person. I took weekend hikes exploring desert trails that reminded me how small my problems felt when I stopped carrying other people's baggage. That's when I met Daniel. He was a friend of a friend, easygoing, thoughtful, and refreshingly uninterested in family politics. We started talking over coffee, then dinners, then weekends that blurred together in the best way. I told him about my family, slowly, carefully expecting judgment or advice. Instead, he listened. When I told him about Christmas, about my mother's words, about the years of favoritism, he didn't flinch or minimize it. He didn't tell me to forgive or reconnect. He just said, "That sounds exhausting," and somehow that meant more than any advice ever had. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. Work was still demanding. There were nights I wondered if I had gone too far, if silence was cruelty disguised as strength. But every time doubt crept in, my body reminded me of the truth. I was calmer, I was sleeping, I was breathing again. By spring, I had been promoted again. I bought a house modest, but mine, with a small yard and enough space to finally feel settled. I adopted a dog, a German Shepherd mix with anxious eyes and too much energy, and named him Atlas because it felt fitting. My family remained quiet. 3 months turned into 6. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for their approval. I wasn't bracing for the next comment, the next comparison, the next reminder that I was never quite enough. I was just living. And that peace, that fragile, hard-earned peace, was something I wasn't willing to give up easily. I didn't hear about Lauren's collapse directly. Of course I didn't. Families like mine don't volunteer uncomfortable truths, especially not to the person they quietly resent for escaping. The information came through the side channels: my grandmother first, then my aunt, then the inevitable trickle of half-whispered updates that made their way to me despite months of silence. Lauren's opportunity had imploded. The business she'd been bragging about at Christmas, the one my parents had nodded along to, like it was the next big thing, turned out to be exactly what it looked like: a predatory scheme dressed up in buzzwords and false promises. When regulators stepped in, everything collapsed overnight. Lauren didn't just lose the money she invested. She lost the money she convinced others to invest. Friends, acquaintances, people who trusted her because my parents vouched for her. Lawsuits were threatened. Relationships burned. And Lauren panicked. She had been living like the payoff was inevitable. Credit cards maxed out. Rent unpaid. Loans taken against anything she could leverage. When the money didn't come, there was nothing left to cushion the fall. My parents did what they had always done. They tried to save her. They drained what remained of their retirement to pay off the loudest creditors, covered her rent, hired lawyers they couldn't afford. My father, who had finally retired, went back to work part-time. My mother took on bookkeeping jobs from home, hunched over spreadsheets late into the night. Lauren moved back into their house, the golden child, 30 years old, sleeping in her childhood bedroom, while my parents worked themselves into exhaustion, trying to keep her afloat. When I heard all of this, I didn't feel the triumph I expected. There was no rush of satisfaction, no vindication, just a quiet sense of inevitability. This was what happened when consequences were delayed for too long. I also didn't reach out. Not to gloat, not to offer help, not to say anything at all. By then, Daniel and I had settled into something real, comfortable, steady. We talked about the future in tentative ways that didn't feel scary. My house felt like home. Atlas had claimed every corner of it as his own. Meanwhile, my family was unraveling. My grandmother told me my parents were exhausted, that Lauren was angry, blaming everyone but herself, that money had become the only topic of conversation in their home. That resentment was creeping in where indulgence used to live. I listened. I nodded. I thanked her for the update, and I kept living my life. For the first time, I wasn't rushing in to fix something that wasn't mine to fix. I wasn't offering myself up as the responsible one, the stabilizer, the quiet solution to problems I didn't create. Lauren's fall wasn't my revenge. It was reality finally catching up. And I knew deep down that when the dust settled, someone would come looking for me. They always did. The first message came from my mother. It was carefully worded the way hers always were when she wanted something but didn't want to admit it yet. She asked how I was doing, said she hoped Arizona was treating me well, mentioned the weather back home, how strange the seasons felt now that she was older. It read like small talk, but the tension hummed beneath every line. I didn't reply. A few days later, another message arrived. This one skipped the pleasantries. She said things had been difficult lately, that unexpected expenses had come up, that family was supposed to be there for each other when things got hard. She didn't ask directly, not yet, but the implication sat there heavy and obvious. Still, I said nothing. My father reached out next. His message was longer, more practical. He talked about stress, about how life had thrown them curveballs they never anticipated. He mentioned how proud they were of my success, how impressed they were by everything I had accomplished. That word proud felt foreign coming from him, almost rehearsed. Then he asked if I could help them financially, just temporarily, just until things stabilized. I read the message twice, then set my phone down and walked Atlas around the block. The desert air was warm, the sky wide and clear. With every step, the contrast between my calm and their chaos became sharper. Lauren's message arrived a week later. It was shorter, less polished. She said she knew things had been tense between us, but reminded me that I was still her sister. She said she was going through a rough patch and could really use some support. She promised she'd pay me back once she got back on her feet. She even added that I'd always been the smart one that she wanted to learn from me. There was no apology, no acknowledgement, no accountability. Just expectation. For years, I had been the silent safety net, the reliable one, the one who would eventually step in because someone had to. And now when the consequences finally landed, they assumed I would do what I always did, absorb the impact, so Lauren didn't have to. I didn't respond. That silence seemed to provoke something in them. My mother's tone shifted from pleading to accusatory. She called me selfish, said she couldn't believe she raised someone so cold. She claimed they had always been there for me, that I was turning my back on the people who loved me most. My father tried a different angle. He wrote about disappointment, about how success had changed me, about how he remembered a little girl who valued family above all else. He said he hoped I would find my way back before it was too late. Lauren's messages turned bitter. She accused me of thinking I was better than everyone, of holding grudges, of finally getting revenge for some imagined slight. The projection was almost impressive. Through all of it, I stayed quiet. Not because I was trying to punish them, not because I was enjoying their panic, but because for the first time in my life, I understood something clearly. Their crisis didn't erase my history. Their need didn't undo decades of dismissal. Their desperation didn't obligate me to sacrifice my peace. I wasn't withholding help. I was withholding permission to be used again. And that was a boundary I had waited 31 years to draw. I came home from work on a Tuesday evening, expecting nothing more dramatic than deciding what to make for dinner and whether Atlas deserved a second walk. Instead, my mother was sitting on my front porch. For a moment, I honestly wondered if I was imagining her. 8 months of silence will do that to you. She looked smaller than I remembered. Shoulders hunched, purse clutched in her lap, like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her hair had more gray in it. Her face was drawn in a way I had never seen before. Atlas started barking the second he sensed someone outside. I froze with my hand still on my keys, heart pounding, not with fear, but with something closer to disbelief. She stood up when she saw me. Louisa, she said, already crying. I didn't hug her. I didn't step closer. I just stood there on my own walkway, the line between us feeling heavier than the 8 months that had passed. She started talking before I could say a word. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't meant what she said at Christmas. She said she was stressed, overwhelmed, and took it out on me. She said she had always loved me, even if she didn't show it well. The words came fast, practiced like she'd rehearsed them during the drive. Tears streaked down her face. Her voice cracked in all the right places. I let her talk. For once in my life, I didn't interrupt. I didn't reassure her. I didn't rush in to make it easier. I just stood there and listened while Atlas paced behind the door. She talked about how hard things had been since I left, how my absence had created a hole in the family, how she lay awake at night wondering where she went wrong, how she never realized how much her words could hurt until she watched me walk out that door on Christmas. If this had happened a year earlier, I might have believed every word. But I knew my mother. And I knew that with her tears often came before requests. When she finally stopped, when the silence settled between us, I asked one question. Why are you really here? The shift was immediate. Her crying slowed. Her shoulders stiffened. Her eyes darted away for half a second before she looked back at me. And there it was, the truth she had been circling the entire time. They needed money. Lauren's situation had gotten worse. Legal trouble now. People threatening lawsuits. Bills stacking up faster than they could manage. They were facing financial ruin, and she didn't know what else to do. I nodded slowly. I told her I understood. I told her I appreciated her coming all this way. And then I told her no. Not loudly, not angrily, just clearly. I said I wasn't going to bail Lauren out. I wasn't going to fund a cycle that had been running my entire life. I said if they wanted, I could recommend financial counselors, debt specialists, people who could help them restructure and plan. But I wasn't writing a check. She tried everything after that. She talked about sacrifice, about carrying me for 9 months, about all the things she had done for me growing up, about what family was supposed to mean. So I asked her what family meant when she called me trash. What family meant when she watched me struggle and told me it built character. What family meant when she only reached out when she needed something. She didn't answer. She just cried harder. I told her she could stay at a hotel for the night if she needed rest before driving back. I even offered to pay for one night. But I made it clear she wasn't staying with me, and nothing about showing up unannounced would change my decision. She left without taking the offer. I watched her walk to her rental car, watched it disappear down my street, and waited for the guilt to hit. It never did. What I felt instead was certainty. For the first time, I hadn't folded. I hadn't rescued. I hadn't erased myself to make someone else comfortable. And I knew deep in my bones that this boundary was permanent. The call came early in the morning, the kind that wakes you before you're fully conscious of who you are or where you are. My grandmother had passed peacefully in her sleep, 83 years old. No pain, no drama. Just a quiet ending to a life that had in many ways been the soft counterweight to the family I grew up in. I booked a flight to Ohio that same day. It was the first time I'd gone back since Christmas. 13 months since I'd walked out of my parents' house without a word. As the plane descended, I felt that old tension creeping back into my shoulders' muscle memory from years of bracing myself before seeing them. Daniel offered to come with me. I told him I needed to do this alone. The funeral was exactly what I expected, and somehow worse. Familiar faces wearing polite expressions, everyone moving carefully around the obvious fractures in the room. My mother saw me first. She rushed over and wrapped her arms around me like nothing had happened, like time hadn't passed, like words hadn't been said. I returned the hug briefly and stepped back. My father nodded at me from across the room, his face unreadable. Lauren avoided eye contact entirely. We were strangers now, people connected by shared history, but separated by choice. After the service, while people lingered in small clusters, my mother pulled me aside. She looked older, not just physically, but emotionally, like the past year had taken something from her she couldn't replace. She said she'd been thinking a lot, said she understood now why I left, said she wished things had been different. It wasn't an apology, but it was closer than anything I'd heard before. I told her I appreciated her saying that. I told her I didn't hate her or my father or Lauren. I just couldn't be part of a family that didn't respect me. That pretended harm hadn't happened. She cried, real tears this time, the kind that didn't feel performative or rushed. She asked if there was any way we could start over, any way to rebuild. I didn't answer immediately. This was the moment I'd imagined 100 times, the moment where forgiveness was expected, where reconciliation was supposed to be automatic because blood demanded it. Instead, I told her the truth. I said rebuilding would require real acknowledgement, not vague regret, not stress-induced excuses, actual recognition of the favoritism, of the damage, of the years I spent shrinking myself to survive in their home. I said I wasn't willing to accept half measures or pretend everything was fine for the sake of appearances. If they wanted a relationship with me, it had to be built on honesty, and the work had to come from them. She nodded. She said she understood. She said she would talk to my father. I didn't promise anything. I didn't hug her again. I just left the funeral feeling something unfamiliar and fragile. Possibility? 14 months passed. Then a letter arrived. An actual handwritten letter from my mother, 6 pages long. She listed memories, specific ones. The birthday they forgot, the graduation they skipped, the countless small moments where I had been overlooked in favor of Lauren. She acknowledged all of it. No defensiveness, no excuses. My father added a page at the end, shorter, direct. He admitted he had failed me by staying silent when he should have spoken up. There was no request in that letter, no hint of need, just ownership. I called my mother the next day. We talked for nearly 3 hours. She cried. I didn't. I told her exactly what those years felt like. She listened without interrupting. That was new. 2 weeks later, my parents flew to Arizona. I picked them up at the airport. And for the first time in my life, it felt like I was meeting them. Not as their daughter, who was expected to endure, but as a woman they were finally trying to understand. My parents stayed for 5 days. Not 5 dramatic days. Not 5 days filled with speeches or apologies or emotional explosions. Just 5 ordinary days that somehow felt extraordinary because of how unfamiliar they were. My mother cried the first night quietly while sitting at my kitchen table, not because I confronted her, not because I pushed. She cried because she was watching me live a life she hadn't imagined for me, one that didn't revolve around fixing other people's problems, one that was calm, stable, full. My father was quieter as usual, but he surprised me in small ways. He took Atlas for long walks in the mornings. He helped me fix a loose cabinet hinge without being asked. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, it wasn't to explain or justify, it was to ask questions. Real ones. They met Daniel properly this time. Not as a passing mention or a vague concept, but as the man I loved. He was respectful but firm kind without trying to impress. Later, my mother told me she could see why I felt safe with him. She said that word safe like it was something new. On their 4th night, we sat outside after dinner, the desert air cooling as the sun disappeared. My father cleared his throat the way he always did when something mattered. He told me they had made a decision. They had cut Lauren off. No more money, no more bailouts, no more rescuing her from consequences. They said they should have done it 20 years ago, but they were afraid she couldn't handle it. Watching me walk away that Christmas forced them to confront the truth they had been protecting the wrong child. My mother admitted Lauren hadn't taken it well. She accused them of choosing me over her, of betrayal, of abandonment. When my parents didn't cave, Lauren stopped calling. They let her. For the first time in her life, Lauren was being asked to stand on her own. I didn't feel triumph hearing that. I felt closure. Lauren tried reaching out to me once after that, a message asking for a loan to start a new business. $5,000. Promises attached. Familiar language. I didn't respond. Daniel and I got married the following April. Small ceremony. 50 people. No performances. No hidden tensions. My parents sat in the front row. My mother cried through the entire thing. My father hugged me afterward and said he was proud of me. It was the first time he had ever said those words. Atlas wore a tiny tuxedo and stole the show. We built a life that wasn't about survival or proving anything to anyone. We talked about kids, about the future, about the kind of family we wanted to create, one where love wasn't conditional and support didn't come with strings. Healing didn't mean pretending the past never happened. It meant acknowledging it, learning from it, and choosing something better. Walking away wasn't the end of my family. It was the beginning of one that finally respected me.